The polished marble floor of the First Mercantile Bank gleamed like a sheet of ice, reflecting the sterile, fluorescent lights above. For Dr. Aris Thorne, it wasn't a place of business, it was the scene of a crime about to be committed. Not a crime of theft, but of assumption. Of prejudice so deeply ingrained it had become a reflex. Her heart, a steady drum usually reserved for boardroom negotiations, began a frantic, unfamiliar rhythm against her ribs. She watched the bank manager, a man whose smile was as practiced and empty as the potted fern in the corner, shake his head with a patronizing sigh. His eyes, cold and dismissive, flickered over her once more, not seeing the sharp, intelligent woman before him, but only a stereotype he thought he understood. The denial wasn't just a refusal of service. It was an erasure. It was the silent, screaming injustice of being deemed unworthy in a temple of money she had more right to than he could possibly fathom. The air grew thick, charged with a hum of silent indignation. This was the moment. The precipice, every instinct, every lesson from a lifetime of fighting to be seen in rooms where she was the only one who looked like her, screamed for a response. But this was different. This was personal. This was her sanctuary, her financial home, violating the most basic tenet of trust. A calm, terrifyingly cold fury began to crystallize within her, freezing the initial shock and hurt solid. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't slump her shoulders. She simply stood a little taller, her gaze sharpening into a weapon. The manager had no idea who he was dealing with. He had no clue that his casual, systemic dismissal was about to trigger a chain of events that would shatter his career and send seismic waves through the very foundation of this institution. He saw a problem to be managed. He was about to meet the solution. And she would make him regret it before he could even finish his condescending sentence. Aris Thorne's world was one of calculated precision. As the founder and CEO of Ether Innovations, a boutique biotech firm on the brink of a revolutionary cancer diagnostic breakthrough, her life was a symphony of data points, investor meetings, and laser-focused strategy. Her office, a minimalist space atop a steel and glass tower, offered a panoramic view of the city that she had fought tooth and nail to claim a piece of. At 38, she had built an empire from a graduate school thesis, her name whispered with respect in circles that were notoriously hard to crack. First Mercantile Bank wasn't just her bank. It was a strategic partner. For over a decade, she had entrusted them with her company's accounts, her personal wealth, her financial identity. The local branch manager, Mr. Robert Pendleton, often personally called to wish her a happy holiday, his voice oozing unctuous respect. The bank was a familiar stop, a place of routine. Today's visit was just another item on a daunting checklist, a last-minute, cash-only payment for a specialized lab component, a crucial piece of equipment needed to finalize a prototype. A six-figure sum, but a mere fraction of the millions her company held in its accounts there. She had dressed for efficiency, not impression, a tailored, cerulean blue pantsuit, understated gold jewelry, her hair pulled back in a severe but elegant knot. She looked every inch the successful executive because she was one. She parked her Aston Martin in the customer lot, the scent of leather and her subtle jasmine perfume a stark contrast to the antiseptic air she was about to enter. The bank was quiet, a cathedral of capitalism. The hushed tones of patrons, the soft clicking of keyboards, the occasional whir of the printer. She approached the main counter, offering a polite smile to the young teller. "Good morning. I'd like to make a withdrawal from my business account, please." A rather large one. The teller, a woman named Chloe according to her name tag, returned the smile. "Of course, ma'am. May I see your ID and a debit card?" Aris slid her driver's license and corporate black card across the cool granite. Chloe's fingers danced across the keyboard. Her smile faltered. A faint line appeared between her eyebrows. She typed again, more deliberately. The confusion on her face deepened into mild alarm. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," she stammered, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There seems to be a hold on this transaction. I'll need to get my manager." "One moment, please." Aris's own smile tightened. A hold? It made no sense. She had confirmed the available balance herself not an hour ago. She watched as Chloe scurried over to a man in a slightly too tight navy blue suit, Mr. Pendleton himself. They conferred in low, urgent tones. Aris saw Pendleton glance over at her, his expression neutral. Then she saw it. The subtle shift. The almost imperceptible double take as his eyes traveled over her, pausing for a microsecond on the rich darkness of her skin. The neutral politeness in his gaze cooled by several degrees, replaced by a glint of suspicion. He approached, his walk a slow, deliberate saunter of assumed authority. "Miss Thorne, is it?" he said, though her name was clearly displayed on the account and the card lying between them. "Dr. Thorne," she corrected gently, her voice even. "There seems to be some confusion. I need to withdraw $250,000 today." Pendleton's smile was a thin, plastic thing. "I see. And may I ask what the purpose of such a significant cash withdrawal is?" The question hung in the air, inappropriate and jarring. A cold trickle of understanding seeped into Aris's veins. This wasn't a routine security question. This was an interrogation. This was the first, subtle hint of the door being closed in her face. "The purpose," she said, her voice losing its warmth, becoming as cool and smooth as the countertop, "is a private business matter. The funds are available. I'd like to complete my transaction." Pendleton's smile didn't waver. Of course. Standard procedure, you understand. For your protection." The words were a shield, a patronizing pat on the head. "If you'll just come with me to my office, we can get this sorted out." The emotional connection was forged then, not in the grand insult, but in the quiet, insidious familiarity of it. This was a song Aris knew all too well, a tune of doubt and diminished expectation she had spent her entire life trying to drown out. The audience, now fully in her shoes, felt that familiar, gut-wrenching squeeze of injustice, the feeling of being prejudged, of having to prove your worth in a world that has already decided you have none. Robert Pendleton's office was a shrine to mediocre ambition. Fake wood paneling, diplomas from a mediocre university, a framed photo of a golf foursome. He took his seat behind the desk, a throne of faux authority, and gestured for Aris to sit in the smaller, lower chair opposite. She remained standing, her posture radiating a defiance she felt burning in her chest. "Now, Dr. Thorne," he began, lacing his fingers together. "A transaction of this size, in cash. It raises certain flags." "What kind of flags, Mr. Pendleton?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. "The kind that are raised for all your clients making large withdrawals? Or a different set entirely?" He blinked, thrown by her directness. Most people, he assumed, would be flustered, defensive. She was neither. She was analytical, dissecting his prejudice like a specimen under one of her own microscopes. "We have a duty to prevent fraud, money laundering." He trailed off, his eyes doing that thing again, assessing her suit, her posture, but seeing only a narrative he had already written. "Perhaps if you could provide some documentation? Invoices for this component? Proof of its necessity?" Aris let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Are you in the habit of demanding to see the business contracts of every CEO who withdraws their company's money?" "Do you ask Mr. Carlson?" She nodded toward a portly, older white man happily depositing a check at a teller's window, "what he plans to spend his dividends on?" Pendleton's neck flushed a mottled red. "That's not the same thing, and I think you know it." The mask was slipping. The subtext became text. "You are not the same. You are not like Mr. Carlson. What I know," Aris said, each word a shard of ice, "is that I have banked with this institution for 12 years. My company, Ether Innovations, has over $18 million in assets held in this very branch. You have called me personally to thank me for my business. And now, you are treating me like a common criminal for attempting to access a fraction of what is rightfully mine." The name Ether Innovations finally registered. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He knew the name. He just hadn't connected the groundbreaking biotech firm to the black woman standing in front of him. The cognitive dissonance was almost physical. He fumbled for his mouse, clicking frantically through screens, his confidence visibly crumbling into panicked ether. I see that now," he stammered. But the protocol, the cash, it's highly unusual. He was digging in, his prejudice now armored by the fear of being proven wrong, of being exposed. To admit error now would be to admit his own bias, and that was a door he would never open. What is unusual, Aris countered, her voice rising for the first time, drawing the attention of people in the main lobby, is being interrogated in my own bank. What is unusual is being made to feel like a supplicant begging for what is already mine. Now, I will ask you one final time. Please process my withdrawal. The standoff was electric. The entire bank had gone silent. Tellers had stopped typing. Clients had turned to watch. Pendleton, cornered and humiliated in front of his audience, made his choice. Pride over profession. Bias over banking. He stood up, puffing out his chest. Without proper documentation, I cannot in good conscience authorize this transaction. I am going to have to ask you to leave. Now. He gestured toward the door, a gesture of finality and breathtaking disrespect. The air left Aris's lungs. The cold fury that had been crystallizing now ignited into a white-hot supernova. She looked at this small, foolish man, at the gawking faces of the patrons, some sympathetic, others gleeful at the spectacle. She saw the entire, rotten system reflected in his terrified, defiant eyes, a system designed to doubt her, to hinder her, to remind her of her place even when she stood at the pinnacle of success. She didn't say another word. She slowly, deliberately, collected her license and her card from his desk. She looked him dead in the eye, and in that look, she conveyed a promise. A promise of a reckoning he could not yet conceive. She turned and walked out of the office, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm of finality on the marble floor. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. The humiliation burned, but it was a fuel. It was rocket fuel. She walked past the silent, staring customers, out the automatic doors, and into the bright, indifferent sunlight. She didn't get in her car. She stood on the sidewalk, the sounds of the city fading into a dull roar in her ears. She pulled her phone from her purse. This wasn't a moment for anger, it was a moment for strategy. This was a hostile takeover of a different kind. She didn't call her lawyer first. She didn't call the corporate headquarters. She opened her banking app, her fingers moving with a swift, deadly precision. She initiated a wire transfer. She moved every single dollar, every cent, from every account she and her company held at First Mercantile, $18,422,115.67, to a competing bank that had been courting her for years, the transaction, requiring only her secure passwords and biometric confirmation, took less than 60 seconds. Inside, Robert Pendleton was probably congratulating himself for preventing a crime, utterly unaware that the real financial catastrophe had just walked out the door and was now standing on the sidewalk, holding it in the palm of her hand. But Aris wasn't done. Not even close. The withdrawal was denied. The retaliation had only just begun. The first sign of the coming storm arrived in Pendleton's email inbox 15 minutes later. An automated alert from the bank's internal system, flagged in urgent, blood-red text, major account activity, Ether Innovations, zero balance. He stared at it, his brain refusing to process the information. Zero balance. It had to be a glitch. A system error. A cold dread, far colder than any he had felt before, began to pool in his stomach. He frantically pulled up the master client profile for Ether Innovations. The screen, once filled with healthy, thriving account numbers and impressive balances, was now a barren wasteland of zeros. $18 million. Gone. Transferred out, his blood ran cold. His hand, trembling now, reached for the phone to call his regional manager. But before he could even dial, the phone rang, a shrill, terrifying sound in the sudden silence of his office. Pendleton, he answered, his voice cracking. IT was the branch operations director. Her voice was a whip of panic and fury. Robert, what in God's name just happened? I have alerts screaming at me. The Ether Innovations accounts are empty. All of them. Do you have any idea what you've done? There must be a mistake. She was just here, he stammered, his mind reeling. She? Who was just there? The director demanded, Dr. Thorne, she wanted a large cash withdrawal. It was suspicious. I denied it. The words tumbled out, pathetic and weak, down a string of expletives hissed through the phone line that made Pendleton flinch. You denied a withdrawal to Dr. Aris Thorne? Are you clinically insane? Do you have any idea who she is? Not just the money, you idiot. She's on the short list for a National Medal of Technology. The press loves her. You denied the CEO of one of our most valuable commercial clients access to her own money? The reality of his situation began to crash down on him, wave after terrifying wave. This wasn't a mistake, it was a career-ending cataclysm. And it was entirely of his own making. Before he could form a response, his secretary burst into his office, her face pale. Mr. Pendleton, sir, there are people here. From corporate. And security. Two severe-looking men in impeccably tailored suits stood in his doorway, their expressions granite. They were flanked by a uniformed security guard. The man on the left, whom Pendleton recognized as the senior vice president of commercial banking, spoke. His voice was quiet, laced with a venomous calm. Robert Pendleton. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties. You will hand over your keys, your keycard, and you will be escorted from the premises. Do not touch your computer. Do not speak to any staff. Let's go now. The very public nature of his downfall was its own special hell. He was marched through the main lobby, past the same tellers and customers who had witnessed his confrontation with Dr. Thorne. Their stares were no longer curious or gleeful, they were pitying, scornful. He was a pariah. The man who lost the bank $18 million in the time it takes to brew a pot of coffee. Yes, he was escorted out the main doors, his personal box of belongings in hand. He saw her. Aris Thorne was still there, leaning against her Aston Martin, calmly sipping a takeout coffee she must have gotten from the cafe down the street. She held up her phone, showing him the screen. It was a confirmation email from the competing bank, welcoming Ether Innovations and detailing the successful transfer of all assets. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply watched him, her gaze an impenetrable, unbreakable mirror reflecting the totality of his ruin. He had seen her as a problem to be managed. She had managed him, and his career, right into oblivion. The cinematic moment was not one of shouting, but of silence. It was the sound of a BMW sedan, the one from corporate, pulling away from the curb with a disgraced former manager in the back seat. It was the sight of a successful woman, finally served her coffee, getting into her own powerful car and driving away, leaving the scene of the crime she did not commit, but the one she had decisively solved. The climax was not the shouting match in the office, it was the silent, devastatingly efficient transfer of wealth. It was the sound of a career shattering. It was the look in Aris's eyes that said, without a single word, you thought you held the power. You never did. The aftermath of Aris's quiet revolution rippled out far beyond the confines of that single bank branch. The following week, a formal, scathing letter from Ether Innovations' top-tier legal firm arrived at First Mercantile's corporate headquarters. It detailed the entire incident, citing gross negligence, racial profiling, and a breach of fiduciary duty. It was not a threat of a lawsuit, it was a detailed autopsy of their failure, a warning that the story would be told, with evidence, if the bank did not undertake immediate and verifiable corrective action. The bank, terrified of the PR nightmare and the potential for a class action suit from other wronged clients, responded with a desperation that was both satisfying and pathetic. The regional director himself, a man several pay grades above the now unemployed Pendleton, arrived at Ether's headquarters with a delegation, hats figuratively in hand. Aris met them in her conference room, the one with the breathtaking city view. She listened, silent and impassive, as they fell over themselves to apologize. They offered to reinstate all accounts with quadruple the interest rate for a year. They offered personal banking services at her beck and call. They offered a six-figure goodwill donation to a charity of her choice. She let them finish their groveling performance. Then she leaned forward, her hand steepled on the polished table. Your offers are noted and irrelevant, she said, her voice echoing softly in the large room. I did not come here to negotiate for perks. My business is gone. It will not return. You cannot buy back my trust, you incinerated it. She pushed a single sheet of paper across the table. It was not a demand for money. It was a list of mandates, a full, independent audit of the bank's transaction flagging protocols, with a public report on its inherent biases, mandatory, intensive anti-bias and anti-racism training for every employee, from tellers to the board of directors, designed and implemented by a firm of her choosing, the creation of a clear, public, and transparent pathway for clients to report incidents of discrimination without fear of retaliation, overseen by a third-party committee. A scholarship fund, established in the name of Ether Innovations, for minority students pursuing STEM fields, funded by the bank to the tune of $5 million. This is not a negotiation, she repeated. This is your path to minimal redemption. You will do this not because it is good PR, but because it is the bare minimum of what is right. You will do it because the next person you wrong might not be a CEO with $18 million to move. They might be a single mother trying to cash her paycheck, or a young entrepreneur trying to secure their first loan. You will do it for them. You will implement every item on this list, and you will send me verified proof of its completion. Or I will hold a press conference and detail my experience with your institution in vivid, unignorable detail. The choice is yours. They took the list. They agreed to every term. They had no other choice. She had not just won a personal victory, she had leveraged her power to force systemic change, to build a protective wall for those who came after her, those who would not have her resources to fight back. Weeks later, Aris stood at the window of her new office. Her accounts were at a new bank, one that had rolled out the red carpet, their respect palpable and genuine. The lab component had been paid for, the prototype was a success, and investor interest was higher than ever. The financial wound had healed, but the emotional scar remained, a permanent reminder. The incident had not broken her, it had forged her resolve into something harder, sharper, more purposeful. She had learned the most painful lesson of her life, that no amount of success, no amount of money, no title or achievement could automatically grant her the one thing she, and so many others, truly craved: basic, unquestioned respect. That had to be taken. It had to be demanded. And sometimes, it had to be built from the rubble of the institutions that failed to provide it. The real impact was internal. She became more vocal, more intentional about using her platform. She mentored young black women in business, not just on strategy, but on the psychological armor required to navigate a world that would constantly try to diminish them. She shared her story, not for sympathy, but as a case study in tactical response. She taught them that dignity is non-negotiable, that their worth was inherent, and that sometimes, the most powerful withdrawal you can make isn't from an account, but of your presence, your talent, and your power from spaces that refuse to honor it. She had made them regret it, yes. But more importantly, she had ensured that the bank, and every institution that heard the echoes of her story, would think twice, 3 times, 1,000 times before making another Aris Thorne feel the sting of their assumptions. She had turned a personal indignity into a universal shield. So the next time you face a moment of injustice, large or small, a moment where you are made to feel less than, a moment where the system seems designed to doubt you, what will you do? Will you accept the erasure? Or will you remember the woman who didn't just close her account, she closed the door on an entire culture of bias, and in doing so, held it open for everyone who followed? The greatest power you possess is the power to choose your response. Choose one that forces the world to see you not as they imagine you to be, but as you truly are.